Last time that I checked, it was 5 chains on my neck. It was no smut on my rep. Last time that I checked, I was selling zones in the set. Make $250,000, no sweat. Last time that I checked, I'm the streets voice out west. Legendary self-made progress. Last time that I checked.
At about 3 p.m. on Sunday, March 31st, 2019, the rapper, philanthropist, and entrepreneur Ermias Joseph Ashkadam, better known to the world by his stage name Nipsey Hussle, arrived at his Marathon clothing store on Slauson Avenue in the Crenshaw area of South LA. It was a quick, unplanned visit. Nipsey had just learned that one of his childhood friends had just been released from prison after serving 20 years, and Nipsey wanted to outfit him with fresh clothes before he reunited with his family. This is who Nipsey Hussle had become. Once a hardened member of the Rolling 60s Crips, one of the most notorious street gangs in LA, he had transformed himself into a community leader and earned a reputation as a bridge builder, someone who could walk into any room, whether filled with rival gang members, city officials, or tech entrepreneurs, and command respect. He was kind and generous, took calls from anyone who needed him, and carried himself with humility despite his growing fame as a musician. Nipsey built a fortune, bought up property, and launched businesses in South LA, independently creating jobs. He mentored young people, funded STEM education programs, and preached an end to gun violence. As Nipsey put it, he did not preach escape, but modeled return. And with every move he made, from opening the Marathon clothing store to funding STEM education programs, Nipsey worked to improve his home community. Jay-Z said about him, quote, "I've never met a young man as focused, as smart, and as invested in his people as Nipsey Hussle." And so, on the morning of March 31st, wearing his typical white t-shirt, blue pants, and do-rag, Nipsey made the short trip from his grandmother's house to the strip mall he owned to provide free clothes to his recently released friend. Nipsey arrived early and passed the time taking photos with fans and chatting with local business owners. The neighborhood, long plagued by violence, drugs, and gang rivalries, had been turning a corner in recent years, thanks in part to Nipsey himself. Through real estate investment, local hiring, and youth programs, he had become a symbol of hope and renewal in Crenshaw. Just before 3:20 p.m., a man named Eric Holder, who had once also been in the Rolling 60s Crips, approached the rapper while he was speaking with a group of friends. There was a brief, tense conversation between the two men. According to witnesses, Nipsey told Holder there were rumors circulating that Holder might be acting as a police informant and advised him to, quote, "clear that up." Nipsey's tone was reportedly calm, almost like a heads up rather than an accusation. Holder didn't raise his voice or escalate the situation in the moment. The two even shook hands before Holder left. Nevertheless, Holder walked away and, according to witnesses, appeared rattled and angry. About 5 minutes later, he returned, this time armed with 2 handguns. He again approached Nipsey, who was still standing in the parking lot where Holder had left him. Nipsey never saw him. Holder raised his weapons and opened fire with both guns. 3 people were hit, 2 bystanders, who both survived, and Nipsey, who was struck by as many as 10 bullets in total, in his torso, his chest, and his head. Then Holder, in an act of pure savagery, approached Nipsey and kicked him in the head as hard as he could. Nipsey was still breathing when paramedics arrived and rushed him to nearby California Hospital Medical Center, but the wounds were catastrophic. At 3:55 p.m., less than 30 minutes after the shooting, Nipsey Hussle was pronounced dead. He was just 33 years old. I'm Jason Beckerman.
I'm Derek Kaufman.
This is Last Days, Nipsey Hussle.
After firing the fatal shots, Eric Holder ran through a nearby alley and jumped into a waiting car that sped off into the surrounding neighborhood and vanished. Witnesses at the scene were cooperative, but none could identify the gunman by name. Holder apparently wasn't widely known in that part of Crenshaw. The big break came when police obtained surveillance footage from a nearby business, which captured not only the shooting, but also the license plate of the getaway car. That led detectives to the owner of the car, a woman named Brianita Nicholson, who was arrested later that day as an accessory to murder. During questioning, Nicholson quickly identified Holder as the shooter and insisted she had no idea what he planned to do when she drove him to the location. She told investigators she believed he was going to grab food for the two of them from a nearby restaurant. It wasn't until the next day, she claimed, that she learned from the news that Nipsey Hussle had been shot and killed. Based on Nicholson's account, police issued an APB for Eric Holder, and the next day, April 2nd, 2019, a tip came into police that Holder was seen in Bellflower, about 15 minutes away from the location of the shooting. He was arrested a few hours later without incident. The case moved slowly through the courts. There were repeated delays due to the COVID-19 pandemic, procedural motions, and changes in Holder's legal representation. Finally, more than 3 years after Nipsey's death, the trial began in June 2022 in downtown Los Angeles. Neither the prosecution nor the defense disputed that Holder killed Nipsey. Instead, the trial focused on whether he acted with premeditation to support a verdict of murder in the first degree. At trial, prosecutors laid out a case of deliberate and calculated revenge. Deputy District Attorney John McKinney pointed to the fact that Holder shot Nipsey as many as 10 times and then kicked him in the head while he was lying on the ground. Quote, "This was a personal attack. It was calculated. It was premeditated." McKinney argued that Holder had felt publicly disrespected when Nipsey allegedly confronted him about rumors that he was a snitch for law enforcement, a serious accusation in gang culture. Holder then walked to his car and returned minutes later with 2 loaded firearms with the intent to kill Nipsey over the perceived slight. But Holder's lawyers rejected this line of thinking, instead arguing that the impact of Nipsey's false accusation was to send Holder into a blind state of rage. They argued, therefore, that Holder could not form the requisite intent for premeditation, and he should be found guilty only for involuntary manslaughter. The difference between the 2 possible verdicts is decades in prison.
It's so interesting. We're recording this on the very same day that Diddy's has been acquitted of the most serious charges against him, and Brian Kohberger has been sentenced to life in prison as opposed to the death penalty. I think in this moment in time, there's a lot of harsh light being shined at our justice system. Basically, people upset about these 2 outcomes in these 2 very high-profile cases. Remember at the time, you and I were working on this case, on the Nipsey Hussle case. We broke the story of Nipsey Hussle's assassination, his murder. And and when the court case was going on, it took so long. It took over 3 years to get to trial. And then you heard Eric Holder making this seemingly outlandish claims about his own sort of lack of intent, said he was in a blind state of rage, despite sort of the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And I think it was the same sort of thing, like, is this kind of thing really possible?
Yeah, look, people were there weren't a lot of fans defending Holder. I mean, Holder was a villain. Nipsey Hussle is the type of guy who, when he passed away, murals were erected immediately. It was like Kobe's passing in a lot of ways. He was revered in these communities, and so people wanted justice, and they wanted it quickly. COVID obviously interfered with quick justice, and then these arguments. You know, the quickness with which it happened was such a shocking act of violence. And when you see the video and him kick his head afterwards, he does look enraged. There was a rage factor, but the fact that he had this interaction, then left and got the guns and then killed him undercuts the idea of a sort of crime of passion where you're in a state of rage and you do something in the immediate moments while a confrontation is happening. You don't need long premeditation. You don't need to lie in behind the bushes. Premeditation just means you thought about it and you acted. And there was clearly enough that he said, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to go get these guns, get a getaway car, kill him and leave.
The key witness for the prosecution was Holder's, I don't know, a girlfriend or friend, Brianita, the woman who had driven the car up. And she was talking about how when he came and got the guns, they had moved the car, and he specifically told her where to park. And she says she had no idea what he was planning to do, and she thought maybe it was odd that he was giving her instructions about exactly where to park.
But he was planning.
And that's sort of the key. So, and he went back to the car to get the guns. I mean, it seems like a far-fetched thing, but in the moment, we were following this sort of, on tenterhooks to see, is he really going to get away with this? But there was a real possibility, we all thought, that he was going to get a voluntary manslaughter. And we're talking about voluntary manslaughter. First offense, you may get, less than a dozen years in prison. I mean, you could get very little time at all, as a matter of fact.
Oh, this is night and day. This is like Alec Baldwin was facing involuntary manslaughter in the Rust case. You can get out in 18 months in some jurisdictions. So it's a much less serious offense for good reason. It's a different type of crime than murder one. Everyone sort of questioned Brianita's testimony at the time. She said, I thought we were just getting food. I'm not sure that's true, but to your point, what matters is, what was Eric Holder thinking? Yeah. He was thinking about planning a getaway, and that's all that matters.
She turned state's evidence very quickly, so I think that probably took the harsh glare of the police investigation off her. I think that her story did hold up. Who knows?
But it doesn't matter as much as what it meant for him.
And sure enough, on July 6, 2022, just 6 hours after deliberations began, the jury found Eric Holder Jr. guilty of first-degree murder. He was also convicted of 2 counts of attempted voluntary manslaughter for shooting the bystanders, one of whom, a man named Kerry Lathan, was left partially paralyzed. The trial was not without incident. During jury deliberations, Holder was assaulted in jail, reportedly slashed with a razor and beaten by other inmates. He was hospitalized and later returned to court with visible injuries, highlighting the notoriety and danger surrounding the case. On February 22nd, L.A. Superior Court Judge Clay Jack sentenced Holder to 60 years to life in prison. During sentencing, Judge Jack addressed the court saying, quote, "Mr. Holder, you are not just responsible for killing a man. You've not only destroyed the life of Mr. Ashkadam, but you've also affected his family, his community, and the world."
I thought this was fascinating because it really indicated the judge from the bench, Crenshaw is a very tightly knit community, and the justice that he was dispensing said that Nipsey Hussle was important to the world. And I admit, when it happened, I was not aware of that. I became aware of it in the aftermath. I remember Raquel worked here, and she was she was beyond.
She was personally devastated. She had met him before,
inconsolable.
and she was able to explain to me and probably others in the newsroom too what he meant to that community. We were aware of his music, but we just weren't aware of that aspect of him. But she certainly was acutely aware of it.
Yes,
and it was amazing the profound effect that his death had on so many people in that community.
To many people outside the world of hip hop, Nipsey Hussle became a household name only after his tragic death. His face was splashed across television screens, his legacy debated on news panels, and his name mentioned alongside artists like Tupac and Biggie, men whose premature deaths seemed to solidify their cultural immortality. But for those who had followed his journey from the beginning, especially fans of West Coast rap and the underground mixtape circuit, Nipsey Hussle had already earned the status of a legend. Nipsey rose through the ranks not through radio hits or flashy gimmicks, but through grit, authenticity, and an unshakable connection to his neighborhood. His early mixtapes, Slauson Boy Volume 1, Bullets Ain't Got No Name, and The Marathon, which became the name of his company, circulated like currency in LA's underground scene, blending vivid street narratives with a growing sense of purpose. He was both a product of gang life and a visionary who believed in hard work as a means to economic power and legacy. On Hustle and Motivate, a standout from his debut studio album Victory Lap, Nipsey rapped about suffering through setbacks, playing the long game, and refusing shortcuts. He rapped, quote, "I went through every emotion, trying to pursue what I'm doing, and I don't do no music for the amusement. I do it for the movement." The line wasn't just braggadocio, it was a mission statement. He wasn't just rapping about the streets, he was standing for something beyond them.
Listening to music at the Mayan ruins, true devotion on the bluest ocean, cruising, my cultural influence, even revolution. I'm integrated vertically, y'all niggas blue.
While many of his peers chased major label deals, Nipsey took a different path. He built his own brand. He founded his independent label, All Money In, and in 2013 made headlines when he sold physical copies of his mixtape, Crenshaw, for $100 each, an unheard of price that drew the attention of Jay-Z, who recognized the gesture as a bold statement about ownership, value, and belief in self-worth. Jay-Z famously bought 100 copies, calling it a move that demonstrated how, quote, Nipsey was not just a rapper, he was a mogul in the making. By the time Victory Lap dropped in 2018, Nipsey had already become a respected figure within the music industry and his community. The album, nominated for Best Rap Album at the Grammys, was the culmination of more than a decade of independent hustle and creative evolution. On Dedication, featuring Kendrick Lamar, he laid bare his purpose, saying his music wasn't about entertainment, but an attempt to honor his ancestors who had been brought to this country as slaves, and he sang about the need for kids from the neighborhood to commit themselves to find their own success.
Just for recreation, dedication, hard work, plus patience. To some more of my sacrifice, I'm done waiting. Told you that I wasn't playing. Now you hear what I've been saying.
I have to say, Nipsey Hussle is an artist who I've really liked posthumously, like a lot. I grew up and Biggie was very important to me. And there were songs that were important to me because I thought they were cool. One of which was a song called 10 Crack Commandments, where he sort of rapped about a method for getting rich by selling crack. And it was sort of funny to me as an 18-year-old. When you listen to Nipsey Hussle's songs, and the two that I like the most are Last Time That I Checked and Grinding All My Life, they're about sort of drive and determination and making it. And they're not just a glorification of violence or crime, which I thought was cool as a high schooler. I listened to Nipsey as an adult, and I think the values in the songs are just good. They're good values. And when he died, I think they really lost something. The rap community lost something pretty major.
Knowing you as I do, I would have thought that Macklemore's thrift shop was more your inspiration.
Also, yeah, that is my guiding North Star as a person, but Nipsey Hussle, also some grit and determination. And so much of his music, like the clip we just played, captured what really made his songs stand out as different. But it was outside the recording studio where Nipsey's impact may have been even greater. He poured his earnings back into South LA, purchasing property, revitalizing local businesses, and launching initiatives aimed at closing the opportunity gap between Black youth and the tech community. At panel discussions and interviews, including appearances with Forbes, he spoke openly about the power of financial literacy, cooperative economics, and long-term thinking. He encouraged young fans to open trust accounts, study compound interest, and own intellectual property rather than lease their talent to record labels. He was a student of self-made moguls, reading books like Contagious, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and The Spook Who Sat by the Door, and urged others to do the same. In interviews, he called out the lack of generational wealth in the Black community and saw financial empowerment not just as survival, but as resistance. And it wasn't lip service. He opened the Marathon clothing store located at Crenshaw and Slauson, just blocks from where he grew up. And he worked with developers to draft concrete plans to build affordable housing and champion STEM education programs and entrepreneurship incubators. Snoop Dogg called him, quote, the first real LA rapper who stood on his words and gave back. And Drake said, quote, he was one of the few who actually was doing the work he rapped about.
So I got to say, I'm not a huge Nipsey Hussle fan. You're much more of a rap guy than I am. But if you listen to the lyrics, as I have done in preparation for this podcast, he was clearly operating really on a different plane than anyone else. On a song, I listened to a song called Blue Laces 2. He sang about speaking at city council meetings and how important that was to be vocal and active. And he wanted to get his urban development plans greenlit, and he learned how to work the system. He didn't always love it, and he talked about that. He said the barriers are too high, especially to Black entrepreneurs. But he said, when there's a need, you have to know how to work the system. And it's something that he really talked about openly. The line from his song is, city council meeting, they got a Hussle speaking, $1 billion project, about to crack the cement. So what if our investments have become strategic? He's sort of like, hey, I got to be strategic about this. I got to make the investments right. And part of that is working the system.
I thought it was brilliant. He worked within the power structures that existed, not outside of them. So much of making it in gang-infested communities can be about selling drugs because we just can't make it in white America. The power structures are too difficult. He said no. He said, let's invest in our community. Let's build businesses here. Let's build affordable housing. Let's do STEM education and actually thrive. And that's the best form of resistance, as you said. It's not just to survive and sort of make it. It's to actually grow our community. And he did the work. That was the cool thing about Nipsey Hussle. He was killed outside of his store in Crenshaw. He was beloved. The Marathon store is still operational.
Every artist, every person who gets rich, regardless of race or socioeconomic background or whatever, they always talk about, make your dreams come true. But he was the kind of guy that he mapped out the steps to help people who wouldn't otherwise have that blueprint put out for them to actually do it. And it's what separated him. Derek, we haven't in a long time a counterfactual. We used to do this all the time. What would have happened had Nipsey Hussle not died that day? It's really, I think, one of the most tragic examples of this that we can imagine. It wasn't just about continued development of great art, the whole thing, but he meant, to the point you were just making, to the community something different than maybe any other artist we've really covered.
Yeah, he really was a sort of metaphor as a person. He died at 33. He would have made more music. He would have invested in more businesses.
That's sort of irrelevant except for his own wealth that he could then do good things with. Right?
He's a little bit, and I don't want to overstate it, but it's the first thing that came to mind. When Kennedy was assassinated, and obviously that was a president, there was a talk of the loss of innocence in America. It was Camelot had been destroyed. This is obviously a much smaller scale. It is more local. I'm not trying to make sort of a direct comparison, but when he died, the community was so devastated that it really created a void. And there was either an opportunity to say, let's build on his legacy and do the things that Nipsey was doing in his honor. And some people did do that. Issa Rae is a great example. She's a landowner in South LA. She's a great television.
She was directly inspired by Nipsey to become a landowner in LA. She obviously has now made a lot of money. And she said, what do I do with this? And she looked at Nipsey and said, I'm not just going to, do it elsewhere. I'm going to come back here to this community and do it here. They were both also of African ancestry. And I think that really bonded them together. And so, close African ancestry. I believe his father was African, and she was as well.
Yeah, and he's the counterpoint. He said, go buy land, go invest in businesses, don't just buy flashy jewelry. Right. That's not the way to generational wealth, which is how we can really compete as a community in America.
And just for what it's worth, on the very day that he was killed, he was due to meet the police commissioner to have conversations. That's maybe a lot of people do that, but it just shows that his heart was always sort of in the right place and makes the tragedy of his loss all the more stark.
Yeah. Nipsey Hussle transcended the gang life of his past to become a unifying figure, a man who could speak to both the corner hustler and the city council. He spoke in ways that felt authentic because he had lived every word, and in doing so, he was able to start a movement. In death, Nipsey became a symbol, but in life, he was already a star, one who lived the truth of his most iconic phrase, "The marathon continues." Because for Nipsey, success wasn't a finish line, it was a movement. And that movement continues today. After his death, Nipsey's family, led by his longtime partner Lauren London and his brother Samuel Ashgadam, known as Black Sam, vowed to carry on his vision. They relaunched the Marathon clothing website, expanded the brand with exclusive capsule drops, and announced the development of the Marathon Collective, a smart retail and cannabis venture Nipsey had been planning before his death. In 2021, the family also unveiled the Marathon Live experience, a virtual reality tribute that allowed fans to interact with his music and legacy in new ways. And most recently, his brother Black Sam opened up the insanely popular Marathon hamburger joint in LA, which has become the go-to fast food place for Hollywood's elite.
After Nipsey's death, tributes poured in from across the entertainment world, but the most powerful tribute of all came from his longtime friend Kendrick Lamar, who recalled the first time he saw Nipsey perform. Quote, "I went into the crowd to listen to the substance he spewed on stage, thinking to myself, this is the type of talent I want to be a part of. His charisma and the way with words was beautiful, but his integrity as a person made me even more enthused. I watched a young, ambitious, black male orchestrate fellowship among the men around him on that tour, determined to execute one thing, and that was his greatness. Greatness in knowledge, greatness in wealth, and greatness in self. That mystique kept me engaged throughout his life and career. The years progressed, and my admiration grew, from up close and from afar. Now, my heart aches for him and his family." He concluded, "A true king will be tested in adversity, to stand in fearlessness in what he believes will impact on the earth as well as in heaven."